This encounter is secondhand, but was told to me on multiple occasions by the person that experienced it. I'm a natural skeptic, so I can't say I 100% believe it, but his telling of it is pretty simple and didn't vary between retellings. I've known this guy for many years, and his advice and input on just about everything is well reasoned and always helpful, so I'll just take his word on it, even if with a grain of salt. So let's get down to business. My friend, we'll call him Marv, likes to go solitary camping on occasion, to be one with nature and the things that go along with that. He is also an avid gun collector and enthusiast. I don't remember exactly when he said this took place, but it was a few years back, and he decided to go camping on a whim. He packed his gear, a few guns, a hunting rifle, and a .45 caliber sidearm specifically, and headed out into the country, on a vast property owned by a friend of his. He had full permission in the works. This happened close to Kisatchie National Forest in south central Louisiana. I won't be any more specific other than that. It's safe to say, it's miles and miles of forest and wilderness. He liked to hike in pretty deep, and camp at a specific spot he found a few trips prior. So, he made his way in and set up camp in his usual small clearing for the night. It's now late afternoon when he heard leaves crunching and twigs being stepped on. He assumed it was an animal at first, and got up from cooking something on the fire to try and get a look. He gazed in the direction of the noise, and saw a man approaching through the trees, several yards away. He has described his etiquette for dealing with other people in very remote places as always being cautious, as most often, most people he comes across are armed as well. He tries to stay as friendly as possible, but still keeps his guard up, looking for any ulterior motives, as you never can tell what some folks are up to out in the middle of nowhere. He'll make chit-chat with them, find out generally what they're up to if he can, and occasionally share a meal, etc. He's never really met anyone nefarious as of yet, other than this situation. So, one thing that sets off small alarm bells for him is that he knows he's the only one with permission to be on this property. And secondly, this guy's not dressed for the location at all. He said the guy was wearing a white t-shirt, short blue jogging shorts, and white socks and sneakers. Mind you, Marv is miles out in the middle of the woods, away from any paths, roadways, houses, or really anything. Nobody is going to casually stroll into his current location dressed like that, unless they are lost or confused. It was early fall, but not quite cool, very normal for Louisiana. So there's a ton of mosquitoes, ticks, and other insects aplenty. You're definitely not going to have most of your skin exposed in the deep woods if you can help it. I know this all too well from personal experience. So Marv assumes something might be up and calls out, "Hey there, do you need help or something?" Pretty loudly, definitely loud enough to be heard. The guy keeps walking forward, staring directly at him. Marv is starting to get unnerved, and as I said, I know this guy well, and he's cool as a cucumber in a tense situation. Getting more uneasy as the guy is closing the distance, he gets to his feet and loudly declares, "Hey man, can I help you with something or what?" The guy is 15 to 20 feet away from Marv now, is standing at the edge of the clearing in the forest. The guy, looking Marv dead in the eyes, finally speaks and says clearly, "Help me." Marv said that he was already starting to actually get worried at this point, and because he said the way the guy said this was as if something that didn't know exactly how to talk was saying help me, or at least that's what he first thought. It just didn't sound right. The guy, still not moving, says, "Help me." Again, slightly more emphatic, but really just louder. Marv said This is when he picked up on what was truly wrong about this. He said the inflection of the voice was more female and actually sounded like a recording being played back, and the guy's lip and mouth movements weren't matching up with the phrase. It was like he was just opening his mouth, emitting the phrase and closing it again. Marv asked, "What do you need help with?" Not daring to move. The guy, still standing motionless and still looking directly at him, repeated the phrase another 3 times. Marv, now totally unsure what the hell is going on, interrupts the guy. "Alright, you need to fucking go now, unless you actually need my help. Do you need my help or not?" He continued loud and firm. The guy didn't miss a beat and started up with the help me's again, and took another step in Marv's direction. Marv told me that he did the only thing that made sense in the moment, and drew his .45, pointing it at the guy and telling him, "You need to fucking go. I don't care what you want." The guy starts to get more animated and agitated, starting to say the phrase louder now, over and over, but not stepping closer or backing away. Marv did what he thought was right given his current predicament, assuming that he was dealing with an unstable or potentially dangerous individual, and discharged a round into the ground in front of the guy. This is where it gets fully batshit crazy, as the guy stops uttering the phrase, goes silent, and still staring at Marv, full-on backflips like gymnasts do, back into the woods and immediately out of sight. Now, I know what you're thinking because I had and still have the same reaction. That sounds like bullshit, but Marv gave no indication of falsehood and told me this multiple times, each time in dead serious demeanor. Marv said that the guy backflipped away effortlessly as if pulled back by an unseen tension coil. He described it as completely humanly unnatural and totally out of place. Marv said he stood there, focused on the forest where the guy had just flipped into, and saw and heard no further movement. It was like the guy had never even been there. He stayed like this as the sun began to set, and the normal night noises crept in. As I mentioned before, Marv is a pretty unshakable fellow, and actually stayed in the area for the night and next night before returning with no further incident. And when he had told me and some other friends about this, of course, we had asked many questions. We asked him to elaborate on the guy's speech sounds. He said the more he thought about it after the incident, the more sure he was that it was definitely a female's voice coming from the guy. It was like he, or it, had heard someone say this and mimicked it like a parrot or other talking bird would, almost like a lure. He doesn't know what it wanted. He, or it didn't give any indication to follow or say anything else. Marv has been back to the property since with no other strange occurrences. The only other minute detail that I can think of is he did remember hearing, during the early morning of the first night, what sounded like a gunshot off in the distance, and it did sound eerily similar to his .45. He thought that he may have heard it again on the hike back out. There are people that hunt in the area, of course, and it could have just been that, but he couldn't be sure. Since this incident, he did some online research of the whole Kissimmee area and found many legends, stories, and supposed encounters dealing with skinwalkers and other unnerving bits of Native American folklore, not to mention mimics and other similar creatures. A lot of his encounter lines up with these tales, but there's nothing tangible to prove it. But even as a skeptic, it does make me wonder about strange things in the remote and untouched areas of our world that can't be explained.
Anybody that's been on a Navajo reservation has either probably heard of some creepy things or have experienced pretty creepy things, namely skinwalkers. I've only seen one. Here's my story. I come from a small town in northern Arizona that's sandwiched between the Paiute Reservation to the north and the U.S.'s largest Navajo reservation to the south. My high school being so small, a 1A high school that has, on average, 80 students enrolled every year, always had to travel south about 5 to 10 hours one way to play another high school in any sport. This means that we traveled a lot on the Navajo Res, and we usually stayed at hotels when we would head out to play and come home in the morning, but this trip was a little bit different. I remember the basketball coach saying that the school didn't have enough money to put up the teams in a hotel that trip, so we were going to be on the road for a total of about 12 hours. I was the only male senior to play basketball that season. We had just got done playing our game and headed home on our bus, Big Blue. It hadn't been long, about 2 hours of driving, before we had entered the reservation. And by this time, everyone was asleep, with it being about 2 in the morning. When we had crossed the Res's border, I noticed the bus driver had sped up and was now going about 85 miles an hour. I thought this was a little weird because he never exceeded the speed limit, at least not in my high school career. For some reason, I couldn't fall asleep like the rest of my teammates, and I just sat at the back of the bus, staring out across the desolate desert landscape that was lit up by the full moon. As I looked out, I could see a figure running towards the bus at an angle of pursuit, and keeping up with the bus at 85 miles an hour. As the figure got closer, I saw that it was humanoid form. As a matter of fact, it looked exactly like a human, only its face seemed to be painted half black and half white, and its eyes seemed to be glowing like a rabbit's eyes, reflecting light from a spotlight. I immediately thought, holy shit, it's a Skinwalker. It ran up to the edge of the road and it just kept up pace with the bus, hurdling sagebrush and rocks while staring directly at me. After I made eye contact with it, I could not look away. It was as if something was holding my head and eyes in place. The Skinwalker just smiled at me, this inhuman smile that went ear to ear, showing crooked yellow pointed teeth. I felt like I was going to throw up, and I was panicking through the whole ordeal. The Skinwalker started to crumple down on all fours, still keeping up with the bus. I could see his bones crack and reform. Hair started appearing all over its body, and in about 3 seconds was now a coyote, and it ran off back into the desert and out of view. As soon as it was gone, I ran to the onboard bathroom and vomited. I didn't want to tell anyone for fear they would think I was crazy, and I confided in my Navajo friend. She told me that I needed to see the chief and get a blessing. I saw him the next day. He just came up to me and mumbled something in Navajo while waving a feathered scepter-like thing, turned around, got back in his truck and drove off. To this day, I haven't seen another Skinwalker. It might be due to the fact that I moved away from that town and reservation, and if I do have to go south, I go around. Way around. I'm a wildland firefighter with the Forest Service. Not my story, but from an old supervisor of mine that I believe completely. The setting is 2004 or so, Hell's Canyon area of Middle Idaho. His crew had been working all day on an emerging incident and were going to be working through the night as well. Being the assistant superintendent of the crew, second in charge effectively, he was out ahead, scouting on an ATV. He was working his way down a logging road that had not been used in some time, when a bobcat or a lynx, it's been a few years since I heard the story, appears in the middle of the road, but doesn't run away as they usually would. The thing stands there for a good 10 seconds, screams at him, and scampers up a tree not 5 feet off the road. He finds this odd, but not particularly unsettling. Just a half mile or so down the road, he finds a small cabin. Also odd, as this is federal land and no private structure should be there. Upon investigation, all the windows have been boarded shut tight, and someone had done a good job of doing so. The door had been punched out and secured to a hole drilled into the log frame by a chain. Someone did not want anything getting in or out. Peering through the hole in the door, he can see that everything in the house is upset. This has him kind of unsettled, so he hops on his ATV and heads back up the road. Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Right where the bobcat had been, now stands a Native American woman in a badly tattered nightgown and bare feet, just standing there. He yells at her, asking if she needs help. She just screamed at him, the same scream as the cat before, and climbs right up the tree, faster than any human has a right to be climbing. Obviously, he nopes out of there as fast as he can. Now, I would not believe most people that try to tell me something like this, but this was a serious man that did not fuck around about many things. He was dead serious the 2 times I've heard him tell this story, and I 100% believe that he saw what he saw. I'm Navajo, and boy, have I heard a lot of stories growing up on the reservation. While I've never actually seen anything myself, which I'm grateful for, I've benefited by being around the people who have. There is a different kind of evil that exists in the quiet high deserts and deep sandstone canyons of Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. I can only describe it as an ancient evil. Now, there are helpful ceremonies, rituals, and traditions that are still practiced to this day. Hell, even a local hospital has an on-duty medicine man, but it seems to be a double-edged sword. What I mean is, there's also black magic, which most Navajo will not even acknowledge or speak of. We are very superstitious and are heavy with taboos. You'll find this with most First Nation people. From Alaska to Argentina, it's just something you don't do, in fear that it will get the attention of unwanted spirits or harmful beings. Skinwalkers, or Naladushi, are just a few stories that kept me up at night with the covers over my head. Here's a quick one for you guys. A Navajo tribal police officer was driving west on what used to be officially named Highway 666. It was lightly snowing, maybe 1/4 of an inch, which is a lot of snow for home, and he sees an old woman walking on the side of the road. How she got there, or where she was going, was not apparent, because she was so far out in the middle of nowhere. He didn't see her right away, but as he passes, he noticed she's dressed in traditional clothing. A shawl, dress, moccasins, and her hair in the traditional bun. Not too odd, many elders still choose to dress traditionally. But why was she out in such cold weather this late at night? Hitchhiking, maybe. He passed her too quickly and now has to turn around, and as he makes a U-turn, he notices that she's nowhere to be seen. This is fairly flat terrain, and he's sure he saw an old woman walking. He pulls the squad car over and steps out with a flashlight. Confused, he manages to find the woman's footprints in the shallow snow. He follows the footprints until they suddenly turn into what look like dog paw prints, leading away from the road in a hurry. He immediately jumps back into the squad car and meets up with another officer near his patrol. He's a little shaken up, but asks the other officer if he's ever seen anything like that. The officer tells him that he has. He also explains that sometimes it's an old woman, sometimes a very beautiful young girl, but always on that road, and always in the snow, waiting for the right Good Samaritan to let her into their car. I still get nervous driving those wide open spaces at night, and I keep my eyes strictly on the road and turn my music up high. I rarely pick up hitchhikers, but I never picked them up at night.
My mom and her boyfriend were just telling me the story. This past summer, they were out late one night, fishing on a Navajo reservation in Arizona. I can't remember the site, but it was Maricopa County. They had my dog, Sammy, with them. She's very in tune with her surroundings, and will let you know when something is around, and will protect if needed. Suddenly, she just let out a low growl and stared into the distance. My mom's boyfriend got up to investigate, but Sammy refused to go and even started whimpering, which is extremely unusual for her. And they could see something, roughly the shape of a man, but with what appeared to be horns on its head. And they didn't make any noise, it just stared. They initially thought that they were pranksters coming around to fuck with people, until they tried to capture them on film. My mom tried to record them on video. You could see their silhouette in the dark, but when she pointed a flashlight at them, you couldn't see them at all. It was like they vanished in the light, and then they would reappear as soon as the light was taken off them. I'd pass it off as my mom and her boyfriend seeing shit, but that doesn't explain why my very alert dog was so bothered. So, yeah, my mom is now a very firm believer in skinwalkers.
This happened to me a few years back, when I was 5. I was a pretty active kid. I'd go outside and play anytime I got the chance. That being said, because it was summer, I had every intention to run around outside, pretending with toy guns. Here's a couple of things you should know about the property I live on. Number 1. There's a fairly large pond to the north of our home, only about 200 feet that you can easily get to on foot through a small forest between our house and the pond. There are several methods of getting to and from it, as we've cleared several paths over the years. Number 2. We live in a pretty rural area. We're close to other homes, don't get me wrong, but as far as we know, past our house everything to the north is a few miles of unexplored wilderness. Number 3. We live 100 feet from my grandmother's home. My parents had gone out that day. My dad was at work, and my mom was out getting groceries. I couldn't tell you where my grandfather was if I tried, but at that time, we were staying with my grandmother for a couple of hours until one of our parents got home. My brother had laid down for a nap, as he was 2 at the time, and I decided to go out and play. My grandmother told me to stay close to the house, so I did. As unrealistic as it sounds, I knew, even at that age, that there were bad people in the world. And being the fact that we lived just down the road from an apartment complex, and we would frequently see junkies and other riffraff walking down the road in front of my grandmother's house, I knew this all too well. Something else that's notable, my grandfather would frequently take me over to the pond to fish. He'd always catch monstrous catfish, while I stuck to my sunfish and bluegills. But we had a rule that was absolutely stressed to my little brother and I from a young age. Do not go over to the ponds unless there's an adult with you. Even at 5, I knew the dangers of being alone in the wilderness without an adult. Because even then, and today, we knew that people would frequently trek from that apartment complex across to where the pond is, go through a small field to the east, and would follow the road into town from there. So, I was outside playing with a toy gun or something, doing the general thing a 5-year-old would do, mouth sound effects and all, when all of a sudden, something stopped me. I had heard a voice. As far as I knew, I was the only one outdoors at that time. Then I heard the voice for a second time, and couldn't quite make out what it was saying. I checked the back and front door of my grandmother's home, just to be sure it wasn't her. It wasn't. Then I heard the voice a third time, and I knew where it was. It was coming from my house, but no one was there, and I knew this. So, curious 5-year-old me wandered the 100 feet to my home and started snooping around. I should mention that this voice was yelling something unintelligible from a distance. Not screaming, more calmly yelling. I heard the voice a fourth time halfway there, and I stopped dead where I stood. The voice wasn't coming from my house. It was coming from the pond. But what was more, was that the voice sounded like my mother's voice. I knew my mother wasn't home, and my grandmother was inside the house. The most eerie part about all of it was that the voice was yelling my name. Over and over again. They'd yell once, then they'd stop for about 5 seconds, and yell again. I knew my mom wasn't home, so who could the voice be? Curious, after another time of hearing my name called out, I responded, "Yeah?" A few moments of silence followed this, a few seconds longer than before. Then finally, the voice called out my name again. Again I replied, and like clockwork, I heard my name being called out again, coming from the woods toward the pond. After this, I turned around and headed back. I don't know why, but I wasn't creeped out and I wasn't scared, just confused. I told my grandmother, but she chalked it up to be my imagination. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Maybe somebody was in the woods calling out to someone else. Or maybe it was an animal making a sound that I misinterpreted to be my mother calling my name. Regardless, I know that I was convinced then, and even now, I'm still convinced that it wasn't my imagination. We still live on the property where this happened. I've never experienced anything else like this ever since. This story takes place about 2 years ago. My aunt, married into the family, has cousins not related to me, who live on a farm in LaPointe, Utah, on a reservation, and thought it would be fun to have all us other cousins go stay there for a few days and see the Dinosaur National Monument. My aunt's grandmother had recently passed away, and her house was basically empty, so we were to stay there. It was a pretty old house, to say the least. It was made out of painted white cinder blocks. It was pretty run down, but we were only staying there a few days, so we didn't care how luxurious it was. The front door led into a small kitchen, and off the kitchen to the right was a small room with a TV, 2 couches, and a chair. Off of that room was a larger living room area with 2 more pull-out couches, and a door leading to the side of the house. Off the living room was a hall that led to 2 small bedrooms and a bathroom. It was a pretty small house, considering we had around 18 people staying there. Along with the old empty house we were staying in, there were 2 other houses on the property, belonging to my aunt's cousins and their families. These were the only houses for about 2 miles. There were 12 kids in total, ranging from ages 3 to 16, me being the oldest, as well as 2 other kids who lived in the other houses, who wanted to come stay with us. We all slept on pull-out couches and the floor. Other than the parents, there were 2 other people who were staying there. They were soon to be married, so they were staying there for a few days before the wedding. It was a whole big mess of people, but bear with me. They didn't want to sleep in the same house because they weren't married, so the guy, we'll call him B, was sleeping in a small camper outside, while his fiancée slept in one of the bedrooms. Now, we can get to the actual creepy shit. On the first night we were there, me and one of the cousins were on the pull-out couch in the first little room, while all the other kids were either on the couches or the floor in either our room or the other. It was about midnight. Most of the kids were already asleep. We were watching Disney movies and dozing off when we started to hear strange noises outside in the direction of a nearby field. It sounded like a low growling and panting, but not entirely like it was coming from an animal. There was just this weird human-like sound to it. I assumed it was some sort of stray animal and got up to see when one of the other kids who lived next door, we'll call him L, jumped up and told me to just ignore it and go to sleep. I was really confused, and the noises were still happening, but the terrified look on his face told me I should listen. The creature would pace around the house and stop by the door in the kitchen for a few minutes before continuing to circle the house. Neither of us got any sleep that night. The next night was basically the same setup. Kids sleeping everywhere, movies playing, a few people still dozing off. I was exhausted from the night before and managed to fall asleep when I was woken up by one of the youngest kids quietly crying and crawling into bed with me. We'll call him A. I asked him what was the matter, and he said he was scared by the big dog outside the window. I turned to L and asked if they had a dog. He looked completely scared shitless and said no, and told me to ignore it once again. I stayed up for a while after that, watching movies with A, when he asked me to walk him to the bathroom. A little bit of explanation before I continue. This house was shaped kind of like a short L, the bottom part being the kitchen and the 2 living rooms, and where it turns was the hallway with the bedroom and bathroom. The bathroom was right at the beginning of the hall. There was a small window where you could see the wall, where the first living room was straight ahead with a window so you could see the living room, where we were sleeping, and then the rest of the house to the left. Anyways, I walk A to the bathroom and switch on the light when we see it. An extremely tall, dog-like creature standing on its hind legs, facing the window looking into the living room. Its fur was matted, and its eyes seemed to be almost glowing, orange-red. Its hands looked human-like, but with dark fur and long claws. A screamed, and the creature ran around the side of the house on its hind legs. I picked up A and carried him back to the living room to find L, quickly closing the curtains. "What the hell is that?" I whispered to L. "I don't know. If you ignore it, it'll go away," he whispered back. "You seen it before?" "Only a couple of times, but not recently. What the fuck?" Our talking woke up L's younger sister, and surprisingly nobody else. I'm guessing she knew what was going on, because she seemed just as scared as we were. I sat A down on the bed and turned the TV up louder, drowning out the sounds the creature was making outside, and hoping to calm A down a bit and take our minds off whatever the fuck we just saw. The noises circling the house continued for about a half an hour more, when they stopped at the back door in the other room. I peered my head around the corner to face the door. It was kind of like one of those doors that the top half is just a screen, and then there was another separate door that wasn't closed. The door handle on the first door started moving back and forth, and you could see the silhouette of something huge behind it. I rushed over and shut and locked the other door, trying not to wake everyone else. Just as I did, B, the guy sleeping in the camper outside, who was also L's uncle, burst through the kitchen door, slamming it behind him. L asked B what was going on, but he didn't say a word, and rushed down the hall and into the bedroom his fiancée was in. He came out holding a shotgun, and pulled a chair into the corner of the living room, giving him a view of both the kitchen and the back door. He gave us a look of both terror and anger. He told us to go to sleep. We didn't. He sat there all night until the noises stopped around sunrise, then went back outside into the camper without saying a word. I'm surprised no one else woke up, and no one else knows what happened that night. The next morning, there were huge paw prints around the house, and B was discussing something with L's dad, who lived in one of the other houses. They both looked concerned and scared. It was very unsettling. We left later that day for reasons I can't remember, but I'm glad we did. I didn't want to spend another night in that house, and I'm pretty sure what we saw that night was a Skinwalker.